excited to have you here. This is Cornerstone Cares is the first program of the Texas Cares program. And for those of you who haven't been here before, I just want to give you a quick introduction of what the program is all about, the purposes of the program, and what the experience we hope that you'll have going forward. So Texas Cares is really all about community education and support. It's really designed for families of people who are having problems with addiction. This can be alcohol, drugs, a number of other things, and you'll learn more as time goes on here. But the purpose of the program is to bring communities together to get answers to a lot of common questions and to give you an opportunity to talk to others who may be having similar experiences to you and learn practical ways you can address things going on possibly in your family. And the first part of the program is what you're seeing today. This is a nice group of people that all probably have similar things going on in some way or another. And, alcoholism and drug addiction and addiction in general is a really big problem in our community. It actually affects 1 in 4 families, which that number stands out because it's actually on par with a lot of diseases that we're very familiar with, but you're probably not as familiar with the stats because most families don't talk about it. And this program is about getting people together, giving them an opportunity to talk and to learn and to listen from people who are experts in the field. And then beyond that, I think the stat that really stands out to me and was the purpose that myself and my friend Waylon Johnson got together and set out on this journey is that the reoccurrence rate in families is like 35%, which is mind-boggling. And what we wanted to do was to give an opportunity for us to talk about an illness or a problem in our society and hopefully lower that reoccurrence rate so we can address the problem and lower the spread. And that is the whole purpose of the program. So community here, education, experts in the field, which you'll hear tonight. The format of the program is we are going to record the session, so we'll be videoing the session. Basically, anybody who wants to remain anonymous, we're going to take steps to take care of that. And then you'll have an opportunity to ask questions at the end. And then the third part of the program is support. And support's going to come in a couple of different ways, but we're really excited about the partnership with the University of Texas because University of Texas has done a lot of work with the ITC program, which is Invitation to Change. And it's a program that's patterned for small group therapy work, and it's part of our partnership with UT. They'll be doing a lot of research going forward with this program, and our hope is to bring CARES not just to this community, but to other churches in and around Austin, in and around the state, and maybe nationwide, because we feel like in churches there's a big need, and churches traditionally are short of resources. And we patterned this program after another very popular program called Mobile Loaves and Fishes, where communities can be involved on a volunteer basis and bring a program like CARES to an organization like Cornerstone or maybe another church or maybe another company. And so that's the path forward for this. So ITC is going to be part of small group therapy. And then in addition to that, we're going to be working on other types of resources for families to be able to get guidance through their journey to find the right types of resources for their particular situation, which, speaking from my own family experience, it's a real trouble for families to be able to get pointed in the right direction up front and particularly find the right types of resources for their particular issue. So with that, I wanted to welcome you all and introduce our esteemed speaker tonight, Tiffany Anschutz, and Renee Gaitan, who is our leader at Cornerstone Cares and Texas Cares, who's with the University of Texas. So I hope you enjoy the evening, and we'll have our speaker tonight, and then we'll have an opportunity for some Q&A. Thank you.
Well, as has been introduced, we have an excellent speaker here. Tiffany is with us to share her personal and professional expertise. My name is Renee Gaitan, and my role here will be very small. I'm simply moderating. So I'll be on the back seat here for the first 30 minutes or so, and Tiffany has the microphone, but encouraging you all throughout to please, if you have any questions, we want to leave that space for Q&A. You have an expert here in Tiffany to be able to answer questions. So we encourage you to be engaged and participate there. So with that, Tiffany, it's all yours.
Hi, thank you guys for having me. Again, I'm Tiffany Anschutz, and I think a little bit about me is I'm a business owner. I own treatment centers here in the Austin area, Sage Recovery, but I'm also a clinician and a family member, like probably many of you. I've had many loved ones struggle with addiction and mental health, which is what drew me into becoming a clinician and then eventually a leader in the space, trying to make change in areas that I felt needed to change. I have lost, personally, I've had a lot of family members that have died in their addiction, from grandparents to uncles, and as well as a little stepsister. And one of the things that I wanted to talk a little bit about today was, how do you know when to seek professional help, with your loved one? And as I was going through, I went to the University of Texas, got my master's in clinical social work there. And as I was going through those programs, I thought, well, now I'll have the answers, right? Now I will know how I can help my loved ones after, I'd already lost a grandparent and two uncles in their addiction, right? So now I'll have the answers, right? But the reality is, even as a professional, and even now, 10 years after having my own facilities, and much longer after that of having a clinical master's degree in this, is that when it's that close to home, it's different, right? And I needed help to navigate that with my own family. And so I say that because I wanted to help normalize that for you, because I know as a parent that for me, it's, I should know what to do. It's my kid, right? Who knows my kid better than me? And the reality is, when it's that close to home, I had consulted with, I'll give you a funny example, is I had consulted with a psychiatrist friend of mine. Hey, will you see my loved one? I don't know what's going on. And they said, Tiffany, if there was a picture of attention deficit disorder in the diagnostic manual, your loved one's photo would be next to it. That's how obvious it is, right? But when it's that close, it doesn't matter. It's I need help when it's my own loved one. And so I want to start with that and say that to help normalize that for all of you, and for anybody that's listening. Because again, it may seem like, well, I should know what to do, or even if your loved one's been to treatment before, right? You sat through the family program, well, now I should know what to do. But again, when it's that close to home, I urge you to, not shame yourself when you might feel like you need a little bit extra help navigating this process. I am the phone a social worker, if you will, for many other social workers and psychiatrists, right? And a lot of them have base knowledge of addiction, but maybe that's not their specialty, or it's their loved ones. And so, for me, it's identifying when do I ask for help, right? And so, I remember about 8 years ago, a loved one of mine that I look up to, that has always been my biggest mentor, had called me and said, hey, I'm on hour 72 of detox from alcohol. And I cried with tears of happiness, right? And it was one of those things where it was in front of our face. We knew it was a problem, right? And me, even as a clinician, didn't know how to approach him, about getting help. And luckily, health issues led him into needing to seek treatment, for his own life. But, there was then that shame in the back of my head of like, man, how come I didn't intervene? I've done interventions on tons of people. why didn't I intervene on my own loved one, right? And so, what I did was when I flew up there, to check on him, first thing I did was start looking into resources and finding somebody to help me intervene, because simply finishing detox, I knew was not going to be enough for him. He was gambling with his life at this point. And so making phone calls and reaching out to people that I knew that might know of resources in the area, and calling them ahead of time saying, hey, I need you to help me navigate this conversation and this intervention with him. Because even though I'd done many, many successful interventions over the years, again, it was my loved one. And I knew that I needed somebody else to help me navigate that conversation because, again, it's too close to home, right? And so, so I just wanted to talk a little bit tonight and I think talk with Renee, about how I can help everybody, at least some people understand how do you navigate services and how do you know when to ask for professional help.
So Tiffany, one thing that a lot of people ask is when it hits close to home, why is it different? Why, different than I can help a neighbor, I can help a friend, or I can help someone that comes in, but my family member, what makes that so different?
I think the difference is the complexity of the relationship. As a therapist, I'm not allowed to treat my own, loved ones or have those dual relationships, and that's not just for my protection. That's more for theirs, right? And so, for me, when it is your loved one, the reality is you have that complexity of that relationship, and everything is just too close to home, if that makes sense. And so, I can be an active part in as a family member in their treatment, but I can't then be their person treating them. I can't be the one performing the intervention. I can be a participant as a family member in the intervention because when you know so much about it, so for example, the ADD example, right? They just, leave all the doors open because they're careless. No, that's check, or maybe they're just not listening, they don't want to listen to me because I'm related to them, No, they're just struggling with attention deficit disorder. So when it's that close, you know too much about the individual to be able to be effective in any kind of way. So, yeah.
And we often hear from family members too that, it is too close. We're trying to reach for help, but the last thing they think of is how they take care of themselves. So what would your advice be to anyone that's coming into your treatment center that says, I have a family member, the focus is all on them, but you see them and you see that there's a need in them. How do you guide them in caring for themselves?
Yeah, I think, I've, with a lot of the speakers, and if you guys have listened to a lot of them, the conversation has consistently been that it's a family disease, right? And that you've got to put the mask on yourself before helping the person next to you. I was actually just recently, I was on a plane I was speaking at a conference, and I was on a plane, and a woman sitting next to me just asked what I was doing, and it ends up, she said that she had a loved one that went through my program, and she talked about how initially, she was sitting there like begging her loved ones to get help, and then realized that she had things to work on herself, and that the beauty of all of it was that after doing that work on herself, others were inspired to also work within the family system, work on themselves too. And I think that that's the most beautiful example that we can give our loved ones is just the example that we live, right? So if we're asking our loved ones to change, well, yeah, maybe their behaviors are higher risk, for health-related issues, death, things like that. Maybe they're doing higher related, risk behaviors. But the best thing we can do is lead by example. And so for me, I speak openly with our children about, having a therapist. Where are you going? I'm going to a therapist. I'm not going to an appointment. I'm going to a therapist, right? And I want to talk openly about that. And I'm going to exercise and different things like that that I want to lead by example. And I think that the best thing that we can do, even in our healthiest space, and an example we can lead is by having our own therapists, finding programs like CARES. And I think that you'll find as you continue to get happier and healthier yourself, that other people around you see that and want that too. And so you can also then be an inspiration to them. But, as the family addiction cycle, it's rough. And as somebody that's been through it with so many loved ones, it takes a toll on I know it took a toll on my mental health if I, that's when I reached out for support, right? When I recognize that I'm feeling burned out, I'm exhausted, and particularly when I am feeling that way, what I've recognized in myself is that I'm actually working harder than the individual that I'm wishing so much would get help, right? So I'm more like trying to drag them along instead of following any sort of process that I know that I should do as a professional. If I could step back and just look at this from an outside lens, I know that if I'm absolutely, utterly exhausted, that I'm doing it wrong.
So family members get exhausted. We hear the term burned out, and you get to that point where there's no more gas left in the tank. You don't have the energy to keep going. What recommendations do you make in terms of what people need to do daily to avoid getting to that point where you're on empty?
Yeah, I think first is getting your own therapist. I will say that time and time again. Keep your therapist. Don't just have one when times are bad. Keep them consistently. It will make it easier when times get difficult. And we all have those times, whether we have addiction in our families or not, times are going to be difficult. Have that established relationship before that, right? Have it be part of your maintenance, of your own health, like you go get your teeth cleaned, right? But, so I think having that therapist, but if you do have somebody in your family that is taking a toll on your mental health because of the, addiction process and everything how that is impacting your family, please find a therapist that has specialty or at least a lot of experience working in addiction. Because what they can do is they can help support you and coach you a little bit. Now, therapists aren't going to tell you what to do, but they can provide you some support around how to navigate that in a way that's a little bit healthier. I think you'll hear a lot about the word boundaries, and I get a lot of calls. My passion is actually coaching families on those phone calls. I love when I get to answer the phone, and a lot of times it's old friends or a friend of a friend that called and says, hey, call Tiffany. She can help advise you, and I love that stuff. I love it, and I speak to parents a lot, who say, I don't know how to set that boundary. It's my kid. Like, if I kick them out, then where are they going to sleep? What are they going to do? And a lot of the times is, first I'm assessing for safety, and there's a lot that goes into everybody's story, right? But then there's similarities, and I'm assessing for safety and all of that. But at the end of the day, also, what I kind of have to help them understand is that what we're doing is not working, right? So if what we're doing day in and day out is not working, then we need to change the system, right? And how can I get you on board with that is I can't promise you what's going to happen if you set the boundaries or if you do X, Y, and Z. I can't promise you that outcome. But what I can tell you is that continuing down this path, it's leading them closer to death, right? And at the end of the day, as difficult as it may be to tell your partner that they can't come home unless they seek treatment, or your loved one, whoever it may be, you'd rather step on their toes than stand on their grave. And I know that's true for me, right? I can continue watching my loved one go through and struggle, and I can continue saying, oh, well, you know, I'll just give them a little bit more money today, and at least I'll let them sleep on my couch again, because at least I'll know that they're safe tonight, right? But I'm enabling them. I'm creating an environment for them that they don't have any motivation to change if I'm continuing to do that. And so as a parent, I know that that is incredibly difficult to even think about, you know, but most of them, right, most of the time, their kid is not that kid that's going to go sleep on the street. Not a lot of the times they're not. You know, they may go then hop couch surf with some friends, and eventually that gets worn out. And I always say, hey, you know, we're here, we love you, and our door's open when you're ready, you know? And so I think part of that's the boundary aspect. And then when you start to set the boundaries and you lay your head on the pillow at night, you know, even if you're doing the difficult thing, at least, you know that you're doing it because you love them. And as difficult as that is, you can lay your head on the pillow at night just knowing, right? Again, I'd rather step on their toes than stand on their grave. But again, all of that goes to say is it's not easy to even know what those boundaries should be, and everybody's situation is a little bit different. And so I do encourage people then, if what you're doing is not working, that's the time to pick up the phone and ask for help from a professional and somebody that can help guide you through that.
And when people pick up the phone, this can be one of the most terrifying moments, because, you know, there's all sorts of feelings like, is there going to be judgment on the other side? Am I going to find out all the things that I did wrong with my family member? What do you say to the person who finally says, I've heard it, and now I'm picking up the phone. This is all new to me. What should they expect to hear on the other side?
Well, what I hope you hear on the other side, and what, you know, I coach my staff on, is that every single person that calls, it took a whole lot of courage to pick up that phone, a whole lot of courage. And so when you do call somewhere, I hope that they are just open-mindedly asking, what's going on and how can I help? If you do hear just real quick qualifying questions, you know, what type of insurance do you have and stuff like that, then you maybe call somewhere else. My staff as a social, you know, me being a social worker, I want them to just ask open-ended questions, tell me a little bit about what's going on and how can we help, and then we are going to help navigate them to whatever is the best option for them. If we're not the best fit, we're going to help navigate them somewhere that is, because it took a lot of courage to call. You know, at least with my staff, they all have their own personal experience, whether they're in long-term recovery or they are loved ones of individuals that have struggled with mental health and addiction. They can 100% relate. And majority of the time, if you do call somewhere, you're going to speak to somebody on the other line that has some experience, because working in the addiction field, you don't typically just, you know, oops, how did I end up here, right? We end up here because of our own personal experience, whether it's through loved ones or through our own personal journey. And so I do hope that at least, you know, maybe if you're calling the place and they're asking a bunch of insurance qualifying questions, I can at least promise you that person has likely had their own personal experiences, not judging them when they answer.
And Tiffany, I'm going to ask a curious question here. You talked about grandparents. You talked about uncles. You talked about your children. And we're talking about multiple generations. And has this whole journey of recovery and what it looks like and what it means to talk to someone for help, has that changed over the years? Is this different from what my parents might have gone through when they were asking for help or didn't ask for help for all those reasons? How is it different today than it was yesterday?
Yeah, I do think that, you know, culturally the landscape's changing. I think that, you know, the stigma is still there, but I am grateful personally for my friends that choose to live their recovery out loud. I'm not saying that everybody needs to do that and everybody has a right to their own anonymity, and we respect that, right? But I really, as much as social media has, made people want to beat their heads against the wall and some of the negative things that have come about it, I do think that some of the positive things that have come about, with social media is that those that are living a life of recovery are able to do so out loud and online and provide podcasts, and as well as other, just social media presences about being, hey, I'm a success story. Not everybody's a success story. Like I mentioned, I lost my little stepsister in 2019 to fentanyl poisoning, unintentional drug overdose, right? And, after many years of battling with her addiction. And, so they're not all success stories. But the ones that are, I think, I love that they share that online and are able to continue to speak loudly. And that's why I share, constantly about, my passion for helping other people in the mental health space and substance use space. And within minutes, people are sharing with me personal information. And for the longest time, I thought you guys all experienced that. I thought you went to, parties and people suddenly shared their entire life trauma with you. I didn't realize it's just because I'm a therapist. But, and I think I love that, though, because I can share openly that, hey, I'm a safe space and I'm somebody that can help, And same with my friends that are in recovery, right? They're able to say, hey, I'm in recovery. And so as they continue to talk about that, other people will then kind of quietly, call and come up to them and things like that. But I think that's easier now, right? With my grandparents, right, it was just, well, grandma just, drinks and gambles. That's just what she does, and that was just the norm, right? Generational alcoholism on the other side of the family, right? Well, they own bars and restaurants. That's what everybody in the bars and restaurants does, is they just drink, right? That's normal. And so it kind of just got normalized over the years and after, particularly, after wars, right? And we didn't have ways to treat any kind of PTSD that was occurring, but there was alcohol. And so, you just continue to see it through the generations, and then you continue to see families not talk about it, right? Even you hear this all the time is well, so-and-so was a severe alcoholic, but we just didn't talk about it. And as I watched my loved ones die in my younger years, right, I witnessed that. Nobody talked about it, And so for me, I made it a point to change that with my children. When my stepsister died, we were open about what happened at her funeral. And we shared that. And, one of the people that we asked to speak, we told her, please, say, hey, anybody in the audience that works in the addiction field, please stand up. And, hey, these are people that if you're struggling yourself, please reach out to them after the funeral. Because I think the more we can be open and talk about that, it's important. With my children, I'm not going to sit there and try to do this whole scare tactic of, don't ever touch alcohol, you're going to die kind of approach, right? I'm just going to educate them from the time they're little. And, until they're older. I've got a 23-year-old stepson I raise, and I have 10 and 12-year-olds. And, I remember my 23-year-old, when he was in high school, a teacher came up to me and was like, are you a social worker? I was like, what? Yeah. And she was like, I just assumed by some of the things your kid, knew the answers to and would talk about, he's got to be the kid of a social worker, And, I think that, again, talking about those things, not as much as you can, being honest with your kids around people that have struggled in the family and why they need to just be more cognizant in their own experimentation if they choose to do so in those journeys. I can't be with my kids 24/7 and watch them like a hawk, and That'd be weird, right? And so, but what I can do is educate them and then just hope when the time comes that they make, a healthy choice.
That's such a powerful thought of being open and transparent with your kids about the struggles that have happened through the generations in their own family and identifying that and naming that. And you mentioned something about things that were relevant to maybe past generations, like a war or a major shift. And there was a light bulb moment when you shared that where I was thinking, well, just the last 5 years, our pandemic. And there's a lot that people talk about depression, about isolation, about lots of movements that were happening during that time. What does it look like for this current generation, for the families and the parents dealing in this era, post or maybe even going through this pandemic journey?
I think, I think just the spike with anxiety, right? Anxiety in general. So as anxiety often is, it's a neurological thing, but it can also be brought on through a perpetual state of not feeling safe. So you hear, adults say, I didn't have one specific traumatic event, but then as I do a further assessment, I ask about food insecurity. They maybe had a single mom that worked multiple jobs, and sometimes they were struggling with paying the bills, and electricity would get shut off and having food on the table at home. Well, that's trauma, right? And that's ongoing kind of underlying, feeling of not being safe, and that creates anxiety. Or witnessing, you think about 9/11 and the consistent things that were on TV. People that weren't even in New York, right, began to experience PTSD from just the constant flashing of images and things that they were seeing on television. Now we're in through the pandemic, we are now being told, well, we don't know the answer, but we just know that we have to stay home. We don't know what, if we're allowed to touch things, if we can get it transmitted that way. We're not sure if the dog can give it to us. We're not sure. And all these uncertainties, as adults is still a lot. But as a kid, hearing those messages of we're not sure, has created a period of time where they're just, again, that unsafe, feeling. And so I think we are going to continue to see spikes in anxiety and depression and things like that. I think we are going to continue to see increases of that from the pandemic, unfortunately, going forward for quite a while. Luckily, at least, the pandemic brought us a lot of virtual stuff. Virtual church, meetings. Churches kind of got online suddenly, and a lot more virtual, options, and people got online a little bit more on the social media stuff. And like I said, that can be bad, but at least there have been more people talking about depression and the state of the mental health. I just hope that we, as a country or globally, continue to recognize that regardless of whatever financial cuts that we make, is that we still continue to prioritize mental health and treat it the same as we would any other, medical need, because I think it's going to continue to get, to be a thing that we're struggling with.
And Tiffany, I have one last question, and we're going to prep the room here for Q&A here. So if you have questions, we'll have a microphone. A volunteer is going to be helping us out with a microphone. If you're online and joining us, if you have questions, please feel free to submit them, and we'll be answering them as we go along. But when you were sharing about the anxiety that people feel in this moment and during this time, I think about what it's like to be in a room, to be invited to hear all of this, and then feel your heart racing and feel your thoughts thinking everyone's looking at me. Everyone knows that this is me that they're talking about. And this terror of even talking to anyone about what's happening at home or what's waiting for you at home. What do you say to the person who's here in the room right now or listening online, who may be having those feelings of anxiety and thinking, what do I do in this moment right now?
I think, again, it's grasping onto those statistics of knowing that you're not alone. You know, as I mentioned, 1 in 4 families, and I think it's probably even higher if I had to guess, are struggling and have struggled, you know, had somebody in their family that have struggled with addiction. And, you know, as, you know, if you pick up the phone and call somewhere, like I said, the individual on the other line, on the phone, 99% of the time are going to be somebody with their own lived experience. And when you are able to reach out and just speak to that person and hear, hey, what can I do? How can I help? And they just knowing that you're talking to somebody that gets it and isn't judging you, I think then makes it easier, you know, to then go that next step and continue to seek help. If it's not, you know, some random, you know, phone call, you know, as you do have friends maybe on social media that have posted about their own mental health journey or substance use journey, or you meet an individual that has done that, you know, that has shared that openly. We share that because we want you to ask us. We share that because we hope that we can open, you know, the door for anybody that might need help. And so, you know, as you're listening and you see those things, that's the person that, if that's the person that you're comfortable reaching out to, reach out to that person. They've been there. They're sharing that because they want you to ask. And so, you know, I hope that you're able to reach out. And if it's, you know, and if it's not by phone and it's sending a message on social media or a message through the website, you know, chatting with somebody online, it might be easier. I just do hope that you do reach out because we want to help. It's why we share what we do. It's so openly and passionately. And so, yeah.
We've been talking about this for a couple of weeks, but 988, a national number that you can dial if you or someone that you love is in the midst of a crisis, and to give you resources. But as we take our next question, aside from 988, is there another number, another resource that you would recommend as a professional for anyone here in the crowd or anyone watching online?
Yeah, you know, I think that oftentimes we recommend Al-Anon, you know, and the reason for that is that it's so easily and readily available and online in so many different cities. ALANON, and the reason, you know, they are individuals that have gone through this and are sharing their experience and helping you as well. And it is different than CARES, right? CARES, what's great about CARES is they're then taking it to the next step of having skills and eventual, you know, groups that can be moderated and things like that to help people through this. Al-Anon, though, can provide some immediate support. And so we always recommend that. You know, you can walk in the door and they're going to immediately greet you with open arms. I promise you that. So.
And these are all resources that we're also going to list online on our website. So Texas Cares, that's tx-cares.org. For those of you online, you'll be seeing a lot of these resources update from week to week, each speaker bringing unique resources for us to follow up. And what was referenced here in terms of the groups, the group therapy groups, those will be launching very soon. So if you'd like to be a part of that, just know that that will be an even closer community for people to be able to share and also work through a lot of patterns, past, present. What do I do in my home? So that's something we're looking forward to taking on. We're going to leave time for a couple questions. If you have a question, please feel free to raise your hand. We got a microphone. We'll go in there. First question.
Take one example where someone is a dire threat to himself and his family, whether threatening or actual violence, driving under the influence, versus the less obvious case where you have a functional alcoholic who still makes it to work but is emotionally checked out, and just wondering what the different approaches would be for the two different types of people. Thank you.
Yeah, you know, I think the first type that you brought up often gets intervened on the fastest because, you know, law enforcement or child protective services or their job, right, becomes involved. And so those ones are probably, honestly, usually kind of brought addressed sooner. The high-functioning alcoholic, right? That was my loved one. That person was going to probably still die successful in their career, but as severe, their body was going to shut down before that, right? Those ones are harder. But the reality is it if it's causing a problem in the marriage, checked out, falling asleep, and not engaged in kids' activities, things like that, it's impacting the marriage, right? And so the approach there then is typically the spouse, if there is a spouse involved. Now, let's say they're not. I've done a lot of interventions, and my hardest ones are on the successful person that's financially responsible for themselves, that doesn't have kids or a partner. Those are my hardest ones. Because then who's there to kind of hold the boundaries? It's for those, it's identifying what is it, though, that motivates that person to get up every day. Maybe it's their friends, maybe it's a hobby that they have, maybe it's their job. And sometimes, it's oftentimes utilizing those resources to help get that individual help. We all have a reason to want to change deep down, all of us do. It's just helping identify that. And that's what, an interventionist or, somebody like myself can help the family is identify what is that one thing that will motivate this person to change. And then how can the family system change to help support that, to help get that individual the treatment that they need.
You got another question?
So, Tiffany, can you talk a little bit about, you mentioned kind of chronic anxiety over the last 5 years, and, I guess the medication associated with treatment for anxiety and the combination of that and alcohol or anything is incredibly dangerous, and it seems to be throwing gas on the fire for addiction. Can you talk about what you've seen there and maybe your observations with it?
Yeah, absolutely. So I tell people all the time, I used to work in detox for a long time, and with heroin, the detox, people will say it's the most uncomfortable, horrible detox ever, right? But with alcohol and anti-anxiety medications, you can actually die from the withdrawal if not done properly. And so, the reason actually is our brains don't know the difference between alcohol and anti-anxiety medications, benzodiazepines. And so what's interesting is, that's why a lot of people self-medicate with alcohol. You always hear people say, well, I just need some drinks to be able to go to social events because I have social anxiety, right? Or I need, and so as people are drinking alcohol and then they're prescribed anti-anxiety medications, well, guess what? Now you're double doing it. Blackouts and all sorts of terrible things can happen while mixing those two. But if you're taking those two together regularly, guess what? That can be a pretty dangerous cocktail as well as a pretty difficult detox. So if you do have a loved one struggling with alcohol or anti-anxiety medications in particular, I don't ever recommend anybody go cold turkey. Please don't do that. Take them to a hospital or a detox facility in particular, so that they can properly be weaned off of that. But yeah, as we have this anxiety on the rise, I think we are going to continue to see an increase either in the abuse of benzodiazepines as well as the increase in alcohol, unfortunately.
Another question? Another thing that I'm thinking about too is that combination that you were talking about. For a lot of families, we talk about here community education and support, and part of the reason why we have these talks is for that education piece. And there may be a lot of family members that are like, I don't know what my kid or family member is taking. Alcohol seems so obvious, but when it comes to other types of medications or pills, what do you advise family members who want to help, but it's just not so obvious what's going on?
Yeah, I think we see this a lot, particularly, with young adults. First of all, our brains don't finish, fully developing until, everybody's a little bit different, but for the most part, until females are 21 and males are 25. That's why our insurance for our cars changed around those age, by the way, as your brain's fully developed, right? But What also happens as our brains finish developing at those ages is when we start to see mood disorders developing, and sometimes some of that underlying, what we call thought disorders and things like that. A lot of that can look like drug addiction, and it often gets mistaken for the one or the other, and the parents are like, I don't know, like they're smoking a ton of weed and doing all these things, but they also kind of act like that when they're not. And oftentimes it's because they're self-medicating, because maybe they are having some of those underlying mental health stuff starting to bud as that brain finishes developing. And so the reality is, like, it's difficult even for a professional to tease out without all the information, let alone as a family member that doesn't really understand what's happening. And so all I can say is, if you're starting to notice just changes in patterns of behavior that are concerning to you, whether it's through their the way that they're interacting with their peers, or maybe they're isolating more, or a lot of times, sadly, it's when we send our kids off to college, because that's when their brain finishes developing. And so they come home and we're like, what just happened? Have they been doing a bunch of drugs? I'm not sure. And so the reality is, if we don't know what's happening, but again, we have something is concerning us due to their behaviors, then reach out for help, right? And if it's one of those things, well, I don't know, what do I do? It's maybe just talking to them with an open mind and just saying, hey, how are things going? I'm really concerned about you, and trying to approach it from that care of like love and concern, and like, hey, can we maybe, go talk to a doctor, or go talk to a therapist, or whatever it may be. If it's kind of that early on, I'm not sure what's happening, I just know that something's not right.
And we have another question.
Yeah, I wanted to ask if a lot of times, like, initially getting somebody into treatment is very hard, but I think also, any suggestions on when people are getting out of an inpatient treatment center, like, you hear all these things like PHP programs, IOP, sober living, and so I'm just wondering the process that is like recommended for those that are coming out, and some of the different things that families probably going to hear.
Yeah, absolutely. So one, I think having clear expectations on the front end when your loved one goes into treatment is if you're financially supporting that person. I always tell them all the time, if you're a person in their life that is financially supporting them, insist that you be part of the treatment process. As if they're an adult, they can choose whether to include you in that or not. And I think if you're going to continue financially supporting them, the clinical team wants you to be part of that, so that we can provide you some support, help you then set some boundaries and expectations for when your loved one returns home and steps down out of treatment. I also want people to just know we don't have magic wands. I wish I did. Would love that. But the reality is, any kind of significant mental health disorder or addiction, it's a long journey, and it's going to continue to be a long journey. I always tell people all the time, we've had people call and say, this is all the money I have, but I want them to go to treatment. And my team's trained to tell them, you're not paying us that money because your loved one's going to need treatment for a long time. Let me help get you connected to resources that you can afford for a long time, and we coach them how to not let the next call that they make take their money. Because this is a long-term thing. And without our magic wands, right, we want you guys to continue through your own therapy as family therapy. And then, as your loved ones, I explain it to clients, is like, let's say you have diabetes or some kind of medical, thing that requires long-term treatment and management. You're going to go and you're going to maybe get some treatment, and things are going to be great. Your numbers are going to look great, and then, something happens, and then maybe your doctor needs to adjust your insulin or your medication, right? It doesn't mean that doctor's not sitting there calling you a failure. They're not sitting there, telling you, well, you failed. That's how we look at mental health and substance use treatment. This is just something that needs long-term maintenance, and you're going to have times where you're going to struggle, and you're just going to need a little bit more support. Maybe you've kind of slowly stepped down, and hey, man, I've got a couple years sober. I'm in individual therapy. I'm doing great, but then bam, something happens in your life, and now suddenly your mental health is struggling. That doesn't mean you're a failure if you need a little bit more support, like, stepping back up into an intensive outpatient program or even up to a residential treatment center. It doesn't mean you're a failure. It just means that your condition needs more support right now. So to look at it as a sliding bar and continuum, not necessarily like I've fallen off these steps, right? And so, I think with the family, it's just having really clear expectations that this is going to be a long journey, and it's something that just needs continued maintenance. And it's not that, oh, well, so-and-so is good, everything's good, right? And not that you have to just continuously worry for the rest of their lives, but, just recognizing that there are going to be times where they're going to be struggling, as we all do, and just know then, hey, to reach back out and offer a little bit more support.
We had another question in the back.
Did you have a question? So going back to your discussion of, the benzos with the alcoholism, in your clinical perspective, how long does it take to officially get, to a point where you're stabilized? And do you think, is there, sadly, is there like a point of no return? Like, you've done so much damage over the years that there's no return?
So I think, one, the detox process is just its own thing, right? With anti-anxiety medications, sometimes there's a really long taper. And because it does have to be done in a gradual step-down way. But, once you're past that, the acute withdrawal process, and let's say, I think what you're talking about is longer-term health and healing. With the brain, I think it just kind of, depends on where the damage is done, right? I actually received a phone call from a friend recently whose loved one was just diagnosed with Wernicke's-Korsakoff syndrome. And what that is kind of the most acute state of what you would call wet brain, encephalitis. And I think even then I'm offering support. I'm not saying, well, might as well just let them drink then. What that diagnosis is probably what somebody would say would be the point of no return. That's where their ability to have any form of short-term memory really is pretty well gone. And there is no reversing that, but at least in today's medical science. But it doesn't mean then I'm not, suggesting and offering support that they be able to give that person some dignity, and safety for the remaining time that they do have. But to get to that point, it's actually pretty rare. I think in my years of working in the field, I've seen one case of that before. It's actually pretty rare, and what causes it is improper detox from alcohol or benzodiazepines. So it's typically an individual that's going into frequent withdrawal over and over, and then they have such a depleted thiamine levels and things like that causes this brain damage. And, my friend said, well, that's impossible. He's never gone a day without drinking. Well, that withdrawal can happen while they're sleeping, and it can be then causing the damage. So, but even then, like I said, very rare. I still say that individual deserves somebody talking to him and seeing, what would you like the rest of your life to look like, and how can we help you? Now that you've had this diagnosis and the doctors have explained to you what this means, are you ready to quit drinking? Can we help you? Because, everybody deserves that dignity. But, I will say, I got to watch somebody Mary, their wife, over the winter holiday, who I will tell you, everybody said, this one, we're going to be at their funeral. Their addiction was so bad. And their drug of choice was heroin, right? And, you know, I had moments where I thought that I had intervened on this individual so many times over the years and, you know, thought, I don't know what's going to save them at this point. And I got to watch him sober walk down the aisle to the love of his life, and I got to see him share his story in a meeting not that long ago. And that's the one that everybody thought there was no way they were going to make it, right? And so I have at least hope for me that, like, if I were that person, that people wouldn't give up on me either. There's a difference, though, between, there are times, though, where I coached the family to set boundaries with that individual, that I had to set boundaries with that individual, and that I told that family to leave him in jail because he's going to die if he gets out. They left him in jail. That's what saved him, I think. But so I'm still holding boundaries, but I'm not giving up. Does that make sense? So I don't know that there's necessarily too far gone. Like I said, I think people even in their last days deserve that dignity.
I think that's a powerful point to end on. It's just the hope that we have in the people that we care about, that no one is too far gone. And Tiffany, for everything that you have shared, both personally and professionally in this space, and what's connected with people online and here in person too, we want to make sure that what you've described as the services that you offer is a welcoming place. We want to make sure that we get that information out. How could people reach out if they needed that service at Sage Recovery?
Yeah, so, you know, I do hope, you know, feel free to pick up the phone and call my team, because you'll find that, you know, again, they're trained little social workers answering the phones, happy to help. But my website's sagerecoveryaustin.com, so feel free to reach out to us.
Well, as we wrap up here, again, those of you who join online, thank you. Stick around, browse through the website, come back to it, because we are adding things as we go along. And also, please do share. We keep saying that it's one of the best kept secrets here in Lakeway, but we want that secret to get out. We want you to be able to share this. And if this had an impact on you, please share with others where it could be an impact. And for those in the room, we ask, we're seeing lots of new faces that we didn't see over the last couple of weeks. So thank you for making it out here. And whoever invited you or shared that, thank you. And you could be the next person that pays that forward. So we encourage you, bring more people. We want to fill this space here. We'll have more speakers every Monday. 6:30, we'll open up the doors. Although the Q&A and the share part closes here, we'll be around here for a little bit so that you all can connect, share information, and hopefully build a community, because that is the purpose. We want to build a community for everyone here. And as we've been ending every previous session here, if it's your first time here, welcome home. We'll see you next Monday. Thanks for coming.